Echo is a game that has a special place in my heart, and I think we all have games like that. They stick with us, and we connect with them in some way that perhaps is rather difficult to describe. Maybe it's the writing or the dialogue that stirs some kind of emotion in us that we can always look back and remember. Maybe it's a matter of atmosphere. The game perhaps has this setting and gives us some immersion that we, for whatever reason, fall right into and then lose ourselves in. Perhaps it's the way the characters interact with one another and the world around them that makes them feel real and relatable. It might not even be a game we feel the need to replay all the time or constantly go back to, but we know that when we played it that first time, it was just right in all the places it needed to be. And Echo is that game for me. Echo is the first and so far the only game made by Ultra Ultra, a development studio from Denmark. On their website, they state that the studio focuses on game experiences meant to transport the player into the far reaches of imagination. We approach this medium we love with originality and curiosity, awe and wonder. And I believe them. I think that's a reason why I wanted to cover Echo. AAA publishing companies and massive development teams spend years and years and untold amounts of capital to create games that we all know about. Games like Mass Effect, Andromeda, Anthem, Fallout 76, Call of Duty, Battlefield. Games that have massive budgets and are ultimately lackluster, uninspired. They have no soul, no charm or heart. They're products first, and they're meant to make money. They're meant to please shareholders. Every year, as if on an assembly line, they are churned out one after the other, and many of these games, despite being the creative sinkholes they are, make millions upon millions of dollars. And while these games make millions of dollars, some small indie development team from Denmark was able to create an experience that I will remember far more and for far longer than anything that I ever got from games that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to create. And yet, Echo goes mostly unnoticed. Echo is a game that understands its limitations. Only so much time, so much money, and so much manpower is available to create an experience in a video game. They have to be smart about what they create. They have to be clever. And they have to put the effort into the things that matter. Ultra Ultra had a premise for a game, and they went about building a world and characters that would support that central gameplay mechanic. They knew they could only make so many assets and characters, so they had to be creative and clever about what they could put into their game to make it feel bigger than it really was. The story of Echo itself is fairly deep. There's a good amount of dialogue between the characters that explains the setting and the premise of the game. The two characters of the game, as Echo only has two characters, are N, voiced by Rose Leslie, the protagonist you control, and London, her AI companion, voiced by Nick Bolton. The way that the characters talk to one another is the basis for all the explanation of their backstories and the lore of the Echo universe, as well as all the important past events that led up to the current events of the game. It's a risky gamble to rely so much on voice work to flesh out a universe, but the talent of the voice actors and the writing for the characters does this very, very well. Both N and London discuss during the game the events that brought them here, and even though they both are talking about the same people and the same happenings, each of the two has their own personality, and they look at all of these events from different perspectives. And in a way, both N and London each have a tragedy to their histories that plays an important role in Echo and their relationship with one another. The game centers around N as she explores the palace, a massive expanse of architecture that spans for what seems like eternity. As she progresses through the different levels of the palace, its secrets reveal themselves and the backstories of the characters are elaborated on through their dialogue as they go deeper and deeper to solve their ultimate goal of bringing back to life a man whom they both knew long, long ago. All the while, N must combat and evade the endless echoes of herself that the palace has created. The gameplay premise is fairly simple, but grows more and more complex, as does the level design, as the game progresses. The palace goes through cycles, In order to spawn and teach the echoes, it must intermittently shut down itself, and the palace becomes dark. When the lights are on, the palace learns from the player's actions, and when the next light cycle occurs, the echoes are able to do whatever the palace has seen N doing. Whenever the player enters a level, the echoes are extremely basic in their ability set. They can move towards the player with simple pathing, but anything past this cannot be accomplished by them. If the palace sees N sprint, then the echoes will begin to sprint after her. If N shoots with her laser, then the echoes will shoot back at N. Interacting with objects, opening doors, riding elevators, expanding bridges, vaulting over objects, traversing water, all actions will be passed on to the echoes. However, when the lights are off and the palace is shut down as it recharges itself, N is free to act however she wishes. She can shoot and sprint and perform whatever action she wants, and the palace will not copy what she does in the dark. However, every light cycle will erase the cycle that came before it. Once the lights turn on, everything the palace learned from N during the previous cycle will be forgotten. What this means is that the more useful, potentially life-saving capabilities that N has, namely sprinting and shooting, should ideally be saved for when the lights are off and she can't be copied. Enemies are numerous as it is, and it's far worse when they can sprint after N at much faster speeds and use ranged attacks they otherwise might not be able to use. The echoes, however, are uncountable. They're infinite. You simply cannot wipe a level free of enemies and then proceed at your leisure. When the lights turn back on, the echoes respawn, with their new knowledge, whatever it may be. Doors that once provided a barrier to entry might only stall the echoes for a moment once they learn to open them themselves. Leaping down off ledges to the safety of lower floors becomes obsolete when the echoes begin to jump down after her. Vaulting over cover and clambering onto higher spaces to evade enemies only teaches them to do the same, meaning your ability to escape them with those means becomes far less effective. N's objective is not to kill the echoes, only to make it through the level to the end. This is normally done by simply reaching a doorway on the other side of a play area, or finding keys and then placing them in the distant holes to unlock the exit, or to activate a certain number of beacons that are spaced out and spread across a large play area. While these aren't particularly clever or novel objectives in and of themselves, the arrangement of each level's design and the number of echoes and their placement and their pathing, along with whatever different abilities they learned from you, is what keeps the game challenging. As the game progresses, new mechanics are slowly but surely added. Objects in the environment to activate that allow you to distract or kill enemies or restore your stamina, and different kinds of terrain to cross like bridges and elevators and water, as well as more difficult enemies that spawn near the game's latter stages. The gameplay itself isn't particularly complicated, but it's a well-executed concept, and the echoes are consistent in their behavior, meaning they won't randomly surprise you with things you couldn't have possibly known to prepare for. N's capabilities are suitable for sneaking around the echoes and isolating them to get past, but echoes always move slightly faster than the player, meaning you can't just walk through a level with a horde of echoes following after, making sprinting a valuable escape asset, as well as one they'll use for hunting you. N's HUD is well designed, showing the locations of nearby enemies, as well as power cells that she can use to activate her abilities. While at least one cell recharges on its own, standing next to power sources scattered around the map can give you more and more, and finding beacons on the map will add to the maximum energy that N can hold at one time. N can use this energy to fire her pistol, killing all echoes in a straight line, or use it as a close-range stun gun to knock back any echoes that get too close. She can also use a pulse, while sneaking, that travels through walls and highlights enemies for a short time around her, and tracks them to help with sneaking about. Each level looks different from the others as well. Clean white levels turn to verdant hallways, turn to dark black tombs that'll shift to opulent golden expanses. Every level has a unique aesthetic, which is important considering the precise and almost sterile nature of the palace's vast repetition of architecture and objects. It was the developer's way of adding aesthetic variety to a place that the player would be spending hours and hours inside of, and they knew that their immense reuse of assets needed to be altered in some way over time to keep the visuals fresh. I think it would be a travesty to not mention how excellent the music of Echo is. The somewhat small selection of music that plays in the background and overhead lends itself perfectly to this ethereal and mysterious palace, the tones both haunting and charming whenever they need to be, fitting in with this strange setting and helping establish the tone of N's adventure. I would highly recommend you go listen to the game's soundtrack and hear for yourself just how well it fits in with the game's architecturally expansive aesthetic. I'm not told what games I have to review. I get to choose. And I chose to make a review about an indie game that released in September of 2017. A game that I still recall fondly and wish that I could play again for the first time. The same way I wish I could go back and watch the Lord of the Rings movies for the first time once more. I want good games to be rewarded. I want the work of talented, passionate development teams to be lauded. Echo was a joy to play, and I want to try and pass that experience that I had on to other people, and help out a studio that clearly gives a damn about creating interesting games with passion in an industry that has so many massive titles that are lacking in everything that I feel makes games great. Echo, to me, represents just what an indie team can do when they put their minds to making something that they are passionate about, and how such limited assets and budget and manpower and time can be cleverly used to create a world that makes me only want more.